15th in the year 2008. I'm Karen Herman with the Archive of American Television. It is my great pleasure today to be interviewing Bob Dickinson here at his home in Los Angeles, California.
Okay, so we're going to start right from the beginning and ask you a few questions about your early years and influences. And we're going to start with, what was your name at birth?
Robert Andrew Dickinson.
Did you have any nicknames growing up?
No, my family only called me Robert or Rob. And when I was in junior high school in Kansas, we moved to Kansas when I was 13 years old. And my best friend said, I can't stand calling you Robert. You're going to be Bob from now on. And it stuck. And so I was Bob to all my friends, Robert to all my family, which pretty much still exists to this day. And I in my early working years, I worked at a place that rented lighting equipment, and there were a lot of Bobs there. And I was very young at the time. It's hard to imagine. And so they called me Little Bobby, meaning not my size but my age. And so the word or the name Bobby stuck to me, and throughout most of television, people actually call me on set Bobby. So I've got three names that I'm known by my family, my friends, and my work associates.
How are you credited on the screen?
I'm credited in the most haphazard manner. Sometimes it's Robert A. Dickinson, sometimes it's Bob Dickinson, sometimes it's Bobby Dickinson, sometimes it's Bob Dickerson. And I'm really not as careful as I should be. But, you know, when you get so many screen credits a year as I do, it becomes just part of, you know, it's like breathing. It just happens, and I don't really pay attention to it.
When were you born?
I was born July 25th, 1953, in Ashford in Kent, England. And my parents did not immigrate to California until 1957. So when I entered into kindergarten, I had a crisp British accent. And actually, I was not a citizen of the United States until 1995.
And what made you decide to become one?
I was so upset with the Reagan and Bush year that and then so overjoyed with the Clinton election that I decided I wasn't going to be frustrated by the outcome of elections and not be able to do anything about it. So I went through the process of getting my citizenship. Ironically, I went and got sworn in during lunch, during a load-in of a show that I was doing down at the Shrine Auditorium. And on the way back, I got on the cell phone and called my sister, who lives in Orange County, and my eldest sister. And I said, how are you doing? I'm doing fine. She says, you know, I got sworn in today as a citizen of the United States. What do you mean you got sworn in? I did too. And we didn't know each of us were going through the process of becoming citizens. And it was one of those mass swearing-in ceremonies, and we both were in the same room at the same time being sworn in as citizens, and had no idea.
Did she have the same impetus to do it as you did?
Yeah, I think, you know, it just gets frustrating when you can't have a say.
Let's talk a bit about your parents. What is your father's name? My
father was William Arthur Dickinson. He was a structural dynamics engineer, and the product of post-World War I England, both my parents, born in the 20s. And actually, England was very poor back then. And World War II especially just completely decimated their economy. So I think that's why in 1953, 8 years after the war, they chose to immigrate to the United States. There were just more opportunities here.
And your mother, her name?
Thelma Dickinson. It's actually Thelma Shooter when she was born, but...
Did she work?
No, she was a housewife, mother.
And you mentioned you had a sister. Any other siblings?
Oh, yeah. I have 3 sisters and a brother. Brother and sister live in Ketchikan, Alaska, and 2 sisters in Orange County.
Where did you fall in the birth order?
I'm the middle child. Classic middle child syndrome.
Did you really? Did you?
Yeah, I was the classic middle child.
What kind of interest did you have growing up?
I didn't have any keen hobbies or interests. I mean, like every kid, I collected stamps for a while until that got boring, and just more of I wasn't athletic per se, and I didn't have any keen interests, as it were. Now, when I got into high school, I got introduced into drama and joined the drama club, and I took drama, and but I also volunteered for the stage crew, and I did find that my talents were much better suited to hanging lights than reciting lines on stage, and so I was really drawn to it, and I really found it very satisfying, and so I used to finish, we get out of high school at what time? 3:30, 4 o'clock. And I'd stay till 7 or 8 o'clock every night working on stage. It was great.
What drew you to it? What made it fascinating for you?
I think part of it is the process is, it's non-conforming to the rest of or to most jobs and most positions, that it's kind of there's more of a fluid environment to be working in, and you were welcome to express yourself. It was more collaborative environment, and I've never done well in rigid circumstances where I was just expected to perform a certain task, and that's it. I like collaboration, and I like environments that are free form and fluid.
What about when you were before you found that? Were there any other professions that you considered?
Well, I remember I had a baseball trophy, which I found recently, and apparently I wrote down, and I now sort of vaguely remember doing this. A friend and I, who had been on the same team where we got the trophy, we wrote down what we were going to be when we grew up. And I wrote down that I was going to be a scientist. I cannot think what I was thinking. I just can't imagine. I never would have made it as a scientist. All that math.
And now, growing up, did you watch a lot of television?
I think I watched as much television as kids did then. We would, after school, we spent more time playing than kids do today, for sure. And it's a different sort of environment than parents didn't worry if their kids came home from school, dumped their books, and then just disappeared, and then came back at 8 o'clock. They didn't need to know where they were, what they were doing, and I was always basically a good kid. I didn't get into trouble. I didn't, never with school or anyone else. So I never got into stuff. So, I just would play. And then, in the evening, we watched the usual array of primetime broadcasts, everything from Gilligan's Island to, all the late 60s, mid-60s primetime. And I remember once I lived in Palos Verdes, and my friends and I had rode our bikes out to Marineland, and it's quite a ride. You had to go down Highway 1 there, and we got to Marineland, and they were shooting a Beverly Hillbillies television special at Marineland. It wasn't a normal Beverly Hillbillies episode. It was a videoed episode that they were going to make a special out of. And we spent the entire day there just gawking at the technicians moving down these gigantic, the size of Volkswagens, these cameras they had. They're moving them around and doing their setups, and it just really made a big impression on me. And also, they came out there and shot Batman quite a few times, and whenever they did, we'd just go stand and watch the process, and it intrigued me enormously.
What do you remember about the shooting of Batman when you were watching it?
two things: how surreal it is for the frame that they're capturing is exactly the way it should be because it's what's going down on film. But this army of people staring at these actors and all these contraptions and lights and just all focused on this single moment. And it just is, the juxtaposition was surreal to me. Today I frequently get that feeling, although I don't work in film, I work in event television. I get that feeling when I walk up onto the stage of, say, the Oscars, and it's this glamorous set, and everything's, just perfect. And you make a left turn and walk off stage, and it's total chaos. I mean, like, wires running everywhere, people bumping in and out, people spilling coffee. It's just completely the antithesis of that perfect world that is offered to the viewing audience.
Now, did you find yourself, when you were watching television or watching these things, did you find yourself already looking at specifically the lighting that was going on? I don't remember doing that. I don't remember. And to be honest with you, the kind of television that was being broadcast in the 50s, they lit very flatly. It was not very interesting. But I don't remember thinking, oh, that's what I want. Now, I have an assistant right now who, at 12 years old, decided he was going to become a lighting designer and subscribed to Lighting Dimensions magazine. And right now he's working in television as his dreams come true. So there are kids that I guess decided at an early age, but it wasn't me, no. I was fascinated with the process, so I knew that's what once I got into stage crew especially, I thought that's what I want. I want to be in this industry somehow. Now, what high school did you attend?
Long Beach Polytechnic High School.
And did you go to college?
No. I started for like a month, and then, it was a long story short, I decided to go to Europe and borrowed the money to go to Europe and had to work to pay it off. And by that point, I decided I wanted to become a DP, because after working with lights in high school, and to pay off this trip to Europe, I started to work at a place that rented lighting equipment, and I found that I felt like I was learning more and being paid for than I was getting from any education. So I just worked, and I worked really hard. I have a very good work ethic, or did back then at least.
Which company was that?
That was called Cinemobile. It was very interesting what was happening in the film, television, and motion picture industry in the early 70s. There was a sea change in the kind and the content that they were producing, and also there was a generational shift occurring, and especially in television. Television really, when they started broadcasting television, there were no television technicians. They had to take people off the street, basically, train them, and then they became, that's how they got their product on the air. And to do this, they put people on staff. So they had these, through the 1950s and 1960s, they had these huge staffs that are just, of the technicians and the stagehands and all the behind the camera people worked for NBC. But because they were on staff, they might be a lighting director most days, but if they didn't have any need for a lighting director and they needed someone to operate a sound boom, then they'd come in and operate a sound boom. And they were kind of treated as with not a huge amount of respect compared to anyone else in the crew. Even though a lighting designer has this enormous impact on the product. And so in the early 1970s, though, because of the Supreme Court ruling in the mid-60s that said that the networks could not produce directly all of their product, that they had to use outside producers.
And at first, the outside producers produced their product in the network studios. But soon the outside producers began producing in studios that they just rented that did not belong to the network, or in other locations. And in doing so, they needed technicians that were not at the networks. And so they started reaching out and developing a freelance talent pool of technicians and of artists. And so this big change was happening in the early 70s, where suddenly there was a new marketplace. And here I was working in this place that rented film equipment primarily. And I was getting a little disillusioned with it after a couple of years, and so I was going to go try to get some work elsewhere. And a gaffer named Doug Pentek, who at the time was the biggest film gaffer, and a gaffer is the person that implements the lighting, or the director of photography's vision in light. And Doug said, "Oh, you should just get in the union. You're too good." And so he just made one call. I'd been trying to get in the union for 2 years, and I'd filled out applications, everything else, nothing. He made one call, and that afternoon I got a call back to go work on a production. It was at Universal, and it was on a series called Banachek. And I worked on that television series, Banachek, for 9 solid months. So it was like my life just changed overnight.
Well, talk a little bit about what that experience was like on Banachek.
It was fantastic. You know, that at the time, Universal Studios was a machine, a complete factory of production. There were Columbo and Banachek and Emergency and you know, I just went on and on and on. There was Toma and God, there were 25, I think, series that they were producing at Universal at the time, and so it was very much a factory mentality, but because there was so much production going on, there was always something happening. And so you might work if for 4 days on Banachek, but then they'd want you a 5th and 6th day to work on Columbo, or it was just constant commotion. And you know, I was reasonably young at the time, and I was earning a nice amount of money, and it turned out to be a real great experience. But
what exactly were you doing, though?
I was a lamp operator, you know, setting up the lamps, running the cable, you know, and doing that. So I was working in the lighting department, and I was a lamp operator, electrician they call them. Juicers, actually, is what they call them. But, you know, there is a problem for me with that kind of production, in that it's kind of schizophrenic, in that there's an intense amount of activity and work, and then it stops. And for take after take after take after take, not very much happens. And it's actually, you get kind of sleepy. It's like it's boring. You know, obviously the director and the cinematographer and the camera operator and the script girl are doing something, but besides that, everyone else is just kind of hanging out, waiting for the next setup. And so I found the process to be cumbersome, but also it was still a big established industry, and I was a new guy with no relatives, which was very important in that industry at the time. And you know, I was really as low on the totem pole as you could be, and I knew I was good. People, gaffers and even directors of photography would request me, and which really irritated some of the older guys. But it was kind of painfully slow. And then a little inexpensive television special, variety television special, came to Universal City Studios to shoot a special called Lights, Camera, Monty. Remember Monty Hall? He used to have a game show. And it was Monty Hall and a bunch of B-list talent. I shouldn't say that, but they'd dancing and singing around the back lot of Universal, singing New York, New York, and of course on New York Street and that kind of thing. Well, it was just like a breath of fresh air because everyone is constantly moving. They're multi-camera, so they don't do take after take. It was fun. It was music, which I really responded to, and also there was not the rigid kind of seniority that I was experiencing in the film industry. And the lighting designer, and I should clarify, in the world of television and in regard to your union affiliation with the IA, lighting designers are really the director of photography. So they don't do exactly the same task in both industries and really can't. But the lighting designer or director of photography was Carl Gibson on that. And Carl, after I did that show, I got a call from Carl. Oh, we should...
Ready? Okay, we're back on. We're talking about Carl Gibson.
Oh, yes. So Carl, I received a phone call from Carl. And he wanted me to meet with himself and his partner, Jeff Engel. And they had a small lighting design firm called Academy Lighting. And it was one of the only freelance lighting design companies in Los Angeles at the time, primarily doing entertainment television, variety shows, events, those. Emmy Ferrantino had recently opened an office in Los Angeles. So there was the Ferrantino branch of IFA and and Carl's company. And Carl's gave me a call a couple of days after we met and said, would you like to come to work for us as a staff member, as our staff gaffer? And I was in the local 728, that's the IA union that covers the lamp operators. So I said, yeah, that sounds great. I was enjoying working at Universal, but I was getting tedious, and I really enjoyed the experience I had with them, so I thought I'll give this a try. And plus the idea of it being staff, in a freelance world, especially when you're younger, it's a little rattling not to know if maybe a week from now you might not be employed, so although I had a pretty good run at it, but this was 1975 and I went to work for them, and it was a fantastic experience. It was a time where variety television was still viable, but they were reaching out for, rather than just do them all in a studio in front of a site, they were taking them on location to Hawaii and the Canadian Rockies, and I did Perry Como specials and Captain and Tennille specials and all these. They're really peculiar when I think back on it. They would take someone, put them in the middle of a forest, and then have them walk along slowly and sing a song, and that was entertainment. And it was very enjoyable, though. It really was. And
who were some of the lighting designers that you were working with?
it was Carl Gibson and Jeff Engel. That was their company. It was just the two of them. The other lighting designers in town that Emmy had brought from the East Coast were all former network. Actually, they were the top network designers. It was Bill Klages, Red McKinnon, George Riesenberger. Who else was there at the time? But there were a number of Ken Paley's. There were a number of designers that they had. And in truth, Bill Klages was considered at the time, on any coast, was considered the biggest lighting designer in the industry at the time. And so, I for several years, or not several, for a few years, I just did these really fun locations and went to Hawaii like 6 times, and just it was a real thrilling time. But I started to get, they started to get a little busy, and they'd have these really small productions where they didn't want to bother with them. They said, why don't you just go light them? And they were for younger directors or producers who were, had money was a big issue for, and so it was fine with them. And I started getting these opportunities to light small productions on my own. And I did a children's series called Upbeat Aesop. And I was doing the Robinson commercials for the department store, which I must have done 8 days a month doing Robinson's commercials. But they were really, really good training for me to start applying myself as a designer as opposed to as a facilitator. And finally, though, I had been gaffing the Don Kirshner's rock concert, which was a series that was kind of a late night music series that I think was on, I don't know what network it was on, but they maybe it was syndicated. But they at the time, there wasn't a lot of places where music acts could promote themselves on television. The days of the Ed Sullivan Show were over, and unless they went on to Soul Train or something like that, there was no place to really get your music out there on television. So a lot of big acts would do Don Kirshner's rock concert. And Jeff Engel was the lighting designer on it. But we were supposed to do a show, say, next Tuesday. And on Friday, Jeff got a call to go to Hawaii for the week. And Jeff thought, I think I'd rather go to Hawaii for the week. And so he arranged to get a lighting designer to fill in for him. The problem was this lighting designer was like 78 years old. And the director, Lou Horvitz, was quite wild at that time, went completely insane. And he said to the producers, he says, I don't want anyone, put Bob on it. Let Bob be the lighting designer. So Lou calls me up and says, if you mess this up, I'm going to, you can't mess it up because I've gone out on the line for you. So I said, okay. Well, it just so happens that I'd been to see a Stevie Nicks or a Fleetwood Mac concert the night before. And everyone in the concert was, of course, smoking dope and cigarettes, and the beams of light from the backlight follow spots were just so crisp. And you could just, even though I was at the back of a giant venue, you could see exactly where they all were because there are these beautiful, crisp beams of light that came down. And so when Lou called me, he said, what can you do that's different? I said, well, we could put in a couple of backlight follow spots and put a little smoke in the air, and it'll look more like a concert, And so he said, yeah, let's do that. Well, it was like, it did transform the show. It just suddenly went from being this very predictable sort of safe television environment to being more like a real concert. And these backlight follow spots just made this tremendous difference. So unfortunately, Jeff never did Don Kirshner's rock concert again.
Now, do you remember the act that you were lighting for this?
I think it was AC/DC, believe it or not. I could be wrong, but I should check with Lou. Lou may remember. But we would do, it was just tremendously silly. We would load in and set up like 5 acts in the morning. They would sound check them all, take all the equipment down, and then they'd bring an audience in. And in like 2.5 hours, they would do all these acts in front of a single audience. And each act would do 4 numbers or X number of numbers. And so in the same day, you might do, the stylistics up and
with AC/DC waiting in the green room, ready to go on stage. So it was this interesting flow to the show.
Now, were you designing your lighting to showcase that, or was it pretty much the same for all of the acts, or did you actually go out and
Well, what we do is, back then we had different arrays of different colored lights, and so we just would use combinations, and they had manual boards, so the guys would, if we wanted the lights to be affecting or doing anything, then they'd be moving the sliders up and down to make the lights go from amber to red to whatever color. And so it was very, very limited what we could do. But and color was our primary tool, and so we heaped it on. But we tried to the attempt was try to reflect the content of the song in the visual, and it was a great place to be experimenting. I as long as I stayed on schedule, no one seemed to care, what it looked like. Then Lou again calls me and says, "I want you to go over with me to set up a new series called Solid Gold." And they don't want to hire you to do the series. They just want you to hire you to do the initial lighting design. And so I said, okay. But when I told the producers of Don Kirshner's, when I told the producers of Don Kirshner's rock concert that I had was going to go do this other series, they felt it was in direct competition with their show, and so they said, if I do that, I can't come back and be the regular lighting designer on Don Kirshner's rock concert. So I called Lou back, and he said, I don't care. And so I figured I'd go with Lou because he was the one that got me the chance on Don Kirshner's rock concert. So I went in there and designed the lighting on Solid Gold, and it was a giant set. And you're way too young to remember it, but it was the concept was to count down the top 10 songs of the week and they would do that by either having the actual act perform it, or they would have dancers do a little choreography while they played the music. And it was all shot on a single set, and it was a big white set. So the only thing that made it look different moment to moment was the lighting. So, and I got all the lights I wanted in this old studio. It was at KTLA, which was the old original Warner Brothers studios, it's actually where they shot The Jazz Singer, the first talkie movie. So, there were just thousands of lights available to me. They're old, giant studio lights meant for film.
Now, did you basically chart it out as to how you wanted
Yes,
it to
that's lighting designers at the time and to this day. And this had really started with Bill Klages, I believe, way back in the 60s. What Bill was experiencing was that they had so few studios in New York to do all these different productions on, that they would come in like at 12 o'clock in the morning, and they would take down all the lights from Perry Como's series or whatever, and they'd have to put up the lights for another show that was going to broadcast that night. And Bill's observation was that the guys were always behind in turning these shows around, so he started doing these blueprints of where the lights should hang and how they should be connected, which dimmer they should be connected to, and that way he was ahead and able to. So by the time I got involved, it was mandatory that because it saves so much in labor, that you design a lighting design on paper, and I didn't know how to draft, so it's something I had to pick up. I had not had any. I'd had a little bit of drafting in junior high school, but nothing that would prepare me for that. But it was something I was well suited to. I picked that up right away, and yes, you had to do a lighting design was an actual series of documents that including the hookup of how the instrumentation would be hooked up. So I did the first week of Solid Gold, and the producers, the man that was supposed to take over the show was staff at KTLA, and he just was not, he was probably 70 years old, and he just was not, he was completely overwhelmed. And it was just apparent to the producers that they needed me to stay just a little bit longer. Well, I ended up being involved in the show for 7 years, and it ended up, that more than anything else, though, was an experience that gave me the ability to experiment with just about everything, and actually to start trusting my own aesthetic. I started taking what we'd call risks. There were certain standards that you're not supposed to violate as a lighting designer. In television then, the cameras were tube cameras. They had, if they got anything very bright, like they actually shot a light that was too bright, or if they stayed on a white surface for too long, it actually would burn in, it could burn the tube. And especially with bright lights, it could actually permanently burn the tube. And if it did that, those tubes cost $20,000. Then, there was a huge amount of money in those tubes. So there were a lot of real firm rules about how you could shoot lights, and the circumstances under which you could use them and everything else. As well as there were expectations about how much light is to be used. We used to key. When I say key, that's the amount of light that we put on someone, so they're exposed. We used to key at 175 foot candles, and a foot candle is a measurement of how much light there is, how much light a candle gives off from 1 foot away, a foot candle. And we used to key at 175 foot candles, which is a lot by today's standards. Nothing by the standards that when they first introduced color television, just an aside, but they used to have to key at 750 foot candles. So it was just I started experimenting, and no one seemed to mind as long as I stayed on schedule. And that was so I would half light people, and I started lowering the light on people, and I would maybe light them very brightly from behind and underexpose their faces and use color on their face, and just trying all these different anything I could do to just sort of make it more interesting. And the more I did, the more confident I became.
Was it done thematically?
Yes. You mean in keeping with the music, or yes? Our primary goal or duty as a lighting designer, one is to deliver an image that can be broadcast. However, that's manipulated, but an image that can be broadcast. And I feel our number two duty is to reflect the moment, whether it's in a play, whether it's musically, whether it's just maybe someone talking, but to appropriately reflect the moment with the lighting. And the number three is to stay on budget and stay on time. So frequently number three takes over, though. So yeah, it was a great training ground for me. And I happened to go see the Genesis tour, and they had just come out with, they had actually financed the research of a new light for touring and for rock and roll, and it was a light that would pan, tilt, and change color, and and it would do so
remotely, but also you could save the cue in a computer so that it could return exactly to that circumstance. And it was just revolutionizing touring music. It was unbelievable to suddenly see these lights. Every light in the air suddenly swooped to one person, and then they all just changed color, and it was just like thrilling.
Did you know you were going to see that when you went to that concert?
No, it was the buzz at the time. Everyone talking about this, and they were called Verilites. Verilite, though, was very snooty about television, and they had no interest in actually even talking to us for television, and especially a little syndicated music show. But again, Solid Gold, ironically, even though it was syndicated by Paramount Television. It was one of the few places, and soon became the premier place, the prestige place, that a music act could appear, because there was just so few venues. MTV had not happened yet, and so there was really no way to get your music out unless you appeared on like Solid Gold or some production that had music on it. And so, all these acts that would come through there, and they never had a problem booking the show. So I went to go see Genesis, as I said, and I decided to try to find. I heard that there was someone else had come up with a knockoff of them, and it was a company called Morpheus, and so I contacted them, and they agreed to put 12 lights on the show. And the producers were grumbling about having to pay for the labor, even though they didn't have to pay for the lights, just to pay for the labor to put them up. And so they went ahead and did it. And Dolly Parton was supposed to be on the show and that day, and she was singing her 9 to 5 song. And at the time, Dolly Parton was, a monster act. She was really, really a big act. And nicest lady, though. Gosh. Worked with her now for well over 20 years, and I've never seen her be anything but totally courteous and kind to people. She's really fantastic. But so they come out and we have these new lights turned on, and Dolly sings her song, and then she gets to working 9 to 5, and the lights all start moving in synchronous movement. Well, that was it. The producer signed a contract to rent the lights for the rest of the season. And it was the first time moving lights had ever been used on broadcast television. And within a week, we had other producers and lighting designers all coming by our studio to watch this tape and see the use of these lights and how to use them and everything else. And so out of that, though, I won my first Emmy Award that season for Solid Gold. I won the Lighting Emmy. And here I was, not 30, and walking away with an Emmy Award as a lighting designer.
How did other people in the industry feel about that?
I think, especially then, there started to be a lot of enthusiasm about my work, especially about about my willingness to do things in an unorthodox manner. And so there was a lot of I was getting a lot of calls, and I should mention I missed just going back. I did after my first year of Solid Gold, I did get an offer from Emiro Ferrantino Associates, Emmy's company, to join their company. And again, as I mentioned before, they were considered the more prestigious company
But and I was feeling a little suffocated at Carl's company at Academy Lighting because they were so small and they didn't get enough projects that needed to be filled. So they filled most of the really good shows they were doing, and I was just, I was doing Solid Gold and some commercials and stuff. And so I went and moved to Ferentino, and the second year of Solid Gold, I believe it was the second year, I got an Emmy nomination. It completely dumbfounded me. In fact, it was one of only 2 Emmy nominations that year were in any category were offered for non-network shows, and that was to the costumer and myself on Solid Gold. No other, in any category, no other Emmy nominations went for a non-network show. There was a term that they used to use back in the 70s and the 60s and 70s. They would talk about doing things network quality, which meant you did it top drawer, meaning that things that were done independently were not considered network quality, that they done on the cheap, and they just were. And by the early 80s, that was there was a flip happening where it was becoming kind of a joke. Like network quality meant it was kind of slipshod, and what was being produced by the outside producers was really, really good. So I joined IFA. I went back there. But I was here. I was 29 years old, and I won my first Emmy Award for Solid Gold. And it really did sort of place me in a different position in the industry. A lot of people started taking me very, very seriously. And this one very amazing personality is the way I'll describe him, a director-producer, Marty Pacetta, who was quite difficult to work with. Marty decided he wanted to give me a try, and so I went to started doing shows with Marty, and I just became Marty's go-to guy. It's like whenever he had a show, they wanted me on it.
Well, I wanted to ask you a couple more questions about Solid Gold before we leave. Particularly, what was the state of the computer technology? We were using these computerized lights, and for people now where it's so common, what was it like then?
Well, ironically, when I first started Solid Gold, we had a board which we'd call a piano board, but what they were is it was a preset board, and there are these different levers, and you could physically assign different lights to a lever. And so when you move the lever, it would control various lights. But as I say, when we would want to change color to the beat of the music, we had to have one or two people in there just going back and forth and back and forth. And so it was completely, it was very primitive by today's standards. We were using electronic dimmers, but they were not resistance dimmers, but there were no computers whatsoever. And but in my second year in Solid Gold, they decided to invest in a new computerized board. And they'd been around since the late 70s, but they were not being used in television because they were rather cumbersome and not very dependable. But Strand had a new light palette that they called, that was customized for television. And they actually put it on Solid Gold, was the first television show it was put on. And what this board allowed you to do is build cues electronically and store them, and then and so a single operator could control 1,000 lights, and it was really quite
is quite a step forward, and it had effects in it that, you could pulse the lights and do different things that never could have been done manually. So it was a big step forward for us. But when we introduced the Verilight, the Morpheus Panaspots was the product we brought in. They had a very rudimentary early generation computer board. It was called the Kliegel Performer. And it's very complicated, but they were sort of forcing this board to control the lights. It was never designed to move lights around or anything. It was just designed to fade lights up and down. But they had come up with a way of modifying the parameters of the board so that it could control the lights. But it was still an analog signal, and and they were not very dependable. They would crash all the time, and probably 8-bit processors, and so it was very by today's standards it was antique. So then the following year, after I won the Emmy I think it was the following year, I'm pretty sure. The years all run together after a while. Marty Pacetta had been doing the Oscars for many years, and Roy Christopher, the production designer on the Oscars, had become very upset the year before with the way the staff lighting designer for ABC had illuminated his set. So he said he refused to do the show unless they would bring in an outside lighting designer. Now, I'd never worked with Roy, and Marty could work with hardly any lighting designers. And so Marty said, fine, we'll bring in Bob Dickinson. So I went in, and it was a miserable experience because the ABC staff hated me, and they felt they were being usurped by this kid. But I decided to take a big risk, and instead of lighting the Oscars, they had actually used like 1,800 lights to light the Oscars the year before. And I brought in like 175 moving lights and only 200 additional fixed lights. So it reduced the number of instrumentation significantly, depending on these moving lights. And so we brought them in, and everyone is thrilled with them, even though the show was a roller coaster. For union reasons, I wasn't in the right union for ABC. I was not allowed to talk directly to the crew. So I had to have a lighting director, even though I'd be this close from someone, I'd have to say, tell him that to bring that down 4 points. And he'd have to say it, and the union steward was following us all over the place, making sure that I did not communicate directly with the crew. And so it was a miserable experience.
That was in 83, right? 50
I think it was 83, yes. I had meant to check all this, and I didn't. I'm sorry. What happened is that I did Kennedy Center Honors a week ago, and then last week I do this show called Christmas in Washington, which is a very sweet show. It's very, very mellow, and usually Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I don't do very much, and all this stuff, including getting prepped for this interview, I was going to take care of. But I got a call from the Olympic Organizing Committee in Vancouver, and they wanted me to meet with me, and they had to meet with me last week. So I ended up flying Monday to Vancouver and meeting Tuesday and flying back on Wednesday. So I didn't get anything done, so I apologize.
That's okay. Is that typical of your career, just one place to another?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I mean, I finished that show last night at 7 o'clock, and I got on a 9:50 flight, and because of headwinds, I didn't get in here until 1:30 in the morning, and so here I am.
Well, you're doing great. Going back to that Academy Award show, was that the first live production that you designed?
Yes, this is yikes. I had done a lot of television now, and a lot of variety television, interpreting music, using color, and I developed an aesthetic by this point.